The gown was red. Not just red, but crimson. Deep, defiant, impossible to ignore. It lay folded perfectly at the edge of the Mississippi River, as though set down with care by invisible hands. No drag marks, no blood, no footprints in the mud, and no Celestine Rousseau. The daughter of one of New Orleans' wealthiest shipping magnates vanished at the peak of carnival season in 1873. The night had been full of music, masks, and champagne. She had twirled across the marble floor of Chateau Rousseau in that unforgettable silk gown. Laughter in her throat, mystery in her eyes. And now, only the dress remained. Before we unravel what happened that night, before we enter the ballroom, the vault, the hidden convent, I want to ask you something. Stories like this are buried by history, covered in silence and money and fear. But we're digging them up, together. So if you believe in stories that deserve to be heard, like this video, share it, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell so you never miss what they want you to forget. Now, back to the dress. It was Inspector Marcel Duray who first laid eyes on it. A man hardened by years of crimes far less elegant than this. Barroom murders, swamp suicides, riverboat brawls. He was no stranger to death, but something about the scene made him pause. "She folded it," he said aloud, crouching by the silk. Or someone did. But not in panic. This was ritual. Behind him, the river gurgled with indifference. The morning fog had not yet lifted, and the iron bridges of the city loomed faint in the distance. A handful of early dock workers had gathered, whispering, crossing themselves. "No shoes, no jewelry," his deputy added, pointing to the ground. "But the scent, do you smell that?" Lilac and orange blossom, the perfume worn by Celestine Rousseau. Expensive, imported from Paris, it clung to the dress like a ghost, refusing to move on. Lucien Rousseau, her father, had already sent runners across the city. His daughter's disappearance was not just a family matter. It was a threat to reputation, to legacy, to order. Within hours, every detective in the quarter knew the name Celestine, and within days, every broadsheet would carry the headline, "Millionaire's daughter vanishes on carnival night. Red silk dress found beside river." But newspaper ink could never capture the weight of what was lost. That morning, the ballroom still smelled of sweat and cigars. Crystal glasses stood half full. Masks were strewn across the polished floor like forgotten identities. No one had seen her leave. No carriage had been ordered, and her fiancé, Julien Devereaux, claimed he'd last seen her laughing beside the musicians, moments before midnight. She said she needed air, he explained, voice trembling, a cut on his lip. She smiled, touched my hand, and slipped away into the hall. I thought she'd return. But Celestine did not return. Not to him. Not to anyone. 2 maids discovered her bedroom door locked from within later that night. When forced open, the room was still and untouched. Her slippers rested beside the bed. Her jewelry box was closed. A music box sat spinning its tune, repeating, and on her writing desk, a note. "They lied to me. All of them, even he did." Signed only with a small symbol, a coiled serpent biting its own tail. By noon, the guests had been dismissed. The doors of Chateau Rousseau sealed. Guards posted. Servants questioned. No one had heard a scream. No one had seen a struggle. And yet the gown, folded, dry, perfect, sat like a monument to something unholy. Duray stood in her room that afternoon, staring at the music box. It had nearly finished its final cycle, a lilting waltz in a minor key. He flipped open the lid. Inside, nestled between the gears, was a dried white rose petal. Not from the ball's decorations. from somewhere else. Older. Fragile. He jotted it in his notebook, along with a list of names he'd overheard in hushed tones that morning. Sister Marceline, the Devereux Vault, the Rousseau Garden, and most strange of all, the Serpent Circle. The city, for all its beauty, has always had layers. Above, the light, the opera houses, the carriages, the pearls. Below, the rot. Secrets paid for in blood, and favors traded beneath the stained glass gaze of the cathedral. Celestine Rousseau had danced too close to both. A former maid, dismissed weeks earlier for improper conduct, appeared that evening at Duray's station. Her name was Lisette, and her eyes darted like a hunted animal's. "She found something," she whispered. "In the ledger, in the garden. I told her not to open it." "What did she find?" Duray asked. "I don't know, but after that night, she stopped smiling. She wore the red dress on purpose. It was a warning." Lisette fled before dawn. The following day, the tides changed. A second witness came forward, a gondolier who worked the docks at night. He claimed to have seen a figure in red, standing by the riverbank after midnight. Said she was humming a lullaby. Said she turned, looked straight at him, and vanished. Not walked away, he insisted, vanished, like fog. Duray didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in lies, and New Orleans, for all its grace and grandeur, was built on them. The dress was sent to the forensics room, what little they could manage in 1873. The results? No blood, no tears, but tiny red threads caught under one fingernail, as though she had struggled, gently, with someone wearing the same color, or as though she had tried to remove it herself before disappearing into the water. But where was her body? Where were her shoes, her earrings, her voice? That night, as the city slept beneath its gas lamps and Mardi Gras banners, a single candle flickered in the upper window of the Rousseau estate. And from the garden, beneath the old willow tree, the ground pulsed, as though something beneath it remembered, as though it too was waiting to speak. The ball at Chateau Rousseau was meant to be the social event of the year. It was the final crescendo of carnival before Lent cloaked the city in silence. Gas lamps lit the drive like a procession of fireflies, and carriages lined the avenue for nearly a mile. Inside, beneath vaulted ceilings and imported Venetian chandeliers, New Orleans elite gathered in masks and mystery. Everyone wore black. That was the theme. Elegant mourning, a nod to old-world traditions. Velvet and lace, pearls and jet. A parade of shadows dancing through the night. Everyone, that is, except for Celestine. She descended the grand staircase alone, wrapped in red silk like a flame among ashes. Some gasped, others whispered. Her mother, Vivienne, clutched her chest. Lucien, her father, blinked hard, but said nothing. And Julien, her fiancé, merely smiled through clenched teeth. To him, her rebellion was embarrassing. To everyone else, it was enthralling. She wore no mask, only a single crimson rose tucked behind one ear. Witnesses recall her gliding through the crowd with unnatural ease, greeting old men and new wives with the same cryptic smile. She danced every waltz, refused every champagne, and seemed to some almost detached, like she knew something they didn't. She wasn't drunk, said a seamstress who had helped prepare the dress, but she looked full, like she'd made a decision no one could stop. The music was led by the St. Louis String Quartet, famous at the time for their mournful renditions of traditional French songs. The final piece before midnight was Le Coeur Voilé, a love song about a bride who drowns herself before her wedding night. Unusual choice. Some found it haunting, others found it tasteless. Celestine requested it. She danced with Julian once, briefly. Observers say their exchange was stiff. One guest claimed Celestine whispered something to him before pulling away. She said, "I know now, that's all." He looked pale after that. The veiled woman appeared shortly after. No one knew her name. Her gown was old-fashioned, her movements jerky and restrained. She wore gloves and never removed her mask. The two women were seen speaking by the side doors, where the lamplight was weakest. "They argued," said one servant, "not loud, but sharp, like sisters who hadn't spoken in years." Only one word from that exchange was clearly overheard: vault. Then came the strike of midnight. The music stopped. The windows trembled slightly. Some blamed wind, others nerves. Celestine was gone. Not gone in the way a girl leaves a room. Gone in the way a presence leaves the air. At first, no one noticed. People assumed she had gone upstairs to rest. The dance continued, but as the hour passed, so did the smiles. Servants were sent. Rooms checked. Julian called out her name. Once, then again. By 1 o'clock, panic had crept through the corridors like smoke. Her parents were silent. The guests began to leave. And still, no Celestine. That night, 2 masked guests reportedly found something behind the curtain near the east parlor, a small silver locket, snapped shut. They turned it in without opening it. By morning, it had vanished from the lost items table. The next day, Celestine Rousseau issued a private statement to his staff. No police involvement unless absolutely necessary. The public must believe she had merely fallen ill or gone to stay with relatives. But when the red gown was found by the river hours later, the truth became impossible to manage. In the days following, Inspector Duray retraced the events of the ball with precision. He walked the garden paths, retraced her steps from the stairwell to the last room she was seen in. The east parlor. The curtains had been drawn. The fire had long gone cold. A single high-heeled slipper rested beneath a divan, unnoticed by the maids. He held it in his hand and turned to the empty fireplace. A faint scent lingered there too, lilac and ash. "I don't believe she ran," Duray told his deputy. "I believe she was trying to be seen." On the third night, a letter arrived, delivered by a child, unsigned. It read, "She found the names. She found the blood. Look beneath the willow." The note was burned by Lucien's staff before the inspector could read it in full. But word of its contents spread through the household like a fever. The willow tree stood at the edge of the Rousseau gardens. Its roots knotted over what had once been a wine vault, now sealed with rusted chains. Vivienne Rousseau took ill shortly after. Her hands shook. Her voice grew thin. She refused to leave her bed and refused all visitors. The physician recorded grief-induced hysteria. Servants whispered darker things. That she saw her daughter in dreams. That she heard her music box playing late at night, even though it had been boxed away. As the nights grew longer and Lent approached, no progress was made. Inspector Duray was denied access to the family ledgers. Julian left the city on business and did not return. One chambermaid, newly hired, claimed to see a figure in red walking the upper gallery at dusk. She followed the sound of footsteps to the northern guest room, only to find the windows open and a red rose placed on the pillow. Duray began to gather names, people Celestine had spoken to in the days before the ball. Her violin tutor, her seamstress, a nun from St. Marcelline Convent. They all had stories, fragments. "She asked about her bloodline," said the nun, her eyes cloudy with fear. "She believed she had been lied to, that she was not a Rousseau by birth." "She paid me double," said the seamstress, "to sew a second lining into the dress. Said she needed to hide something." "What?" Duray asked. She didn't say, but she cried when I gave her the final fitting. Said, "This is the only truth I'll wear." One final detail came from the cook. Harmless at first, then chilling. She asked for red wine that night, the cook said. Only red. Said it would match the dress, said she wanted it to be the last thing they remembered about her. As though she planned to vanish. As though she knew, or worse, as though she knew they'd come for her. 3 days after the ball, the river began giving things back. First, a single earring, rubied, delicate, unmistakably hers, found snagged on a fisherman's net near the Marigny Bend. Then, on the 4th day, a velvet ribbon bearing the Rousseau family crest floated ashore beside the ferry crossing. It was damp, but not ruined, untied, but not torn, as if deliberately released, not ripped away. Inspector Duray stood beside the slow-churning waters, watching the current snake past him like a patient predator. The Mississippi didn't take its victims quietly, nor did it return them with grace. But it seemed to respect Celestine Rousseau. It left clues, not bones, not flesh, symbols. That same evening, as dusk rolled in and the street lamps flickered to life, Duray returned to the Rousseau estate with a single objective: the willow tree. The groundskeeper, old Baptiste, met him at the gate. A quiet man with half a tongue and a glass eye, he had tended the family garden for over 40 years. Rumor claimed he'd once been enslaved by the Rousseaus and had chosen to stay after emancipation, either out of loyalty or fear. No one knew which. Duray approached him carefully. "I need the key to the vault beneath the willow." Baptiste shook his head. "Ain't got no key." "Then help me break the chain." The old man hesitated. "What you find down there, it don't like to be found." But he led the inspector anyway. Past hedgerows trimmed like chess pieces through corridors of jasmine and wrought iron. The willow loomed ahead, its branches hanging low like mourning veils. Beneath its roots was a stone door, cracked and moss-laced, sealed with a rusted chain and an emblem bolted into its center, a coiled serpent biting its own tail. The same symbol Celestine had drawn at the bottom of her note. Duray ran his fingers over the metal. It wasn't decorative. It was ceremonial, designed to warn, not to welcome. Together, they pried open the vault. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and rosewater, a sick combination that clung to the lungs. They descended slowly, lanterns in hand, the spiral steps groaning under their weight. At the bottom, 20 feet below the earth, they found a chamber. And in that chamber they found names. Books, stacks of them, binders bound in cracked leather, some etched with gold leaf, others scorched at the edges. Every ledger bore a date and a name. Devereux, Marchand, Rousseau, Bellamy. Families that built the city. Families that never died poor. Duray opened the first. Inside were records, not of cargo or trade, but of something else entirely. Girls. Names, birth dates, and final notations. Some marked wed, others marked sold, a few simply marked vanished. They weren't slaves. These were daughters, heiresses, socialites, all from prominent families. All disappeared without official record. Each one tied by some thread to the houses of commerce and steel that ruled New Orleans from behind curtained balconies. "This isn't a vault," Duray murmured. "It's a confessional." In the center of the room stood a pedestal. Upon it, a single item, a red silk glove, left hand only, small, blood-stained at the cuff. Duray didn't speak. He didn't need to. Baptiste turned and left without a word. That night, the inspector did not return home. He sat in his office with the glove beside him, turning pages through those ledgers until sunrise. At the end of one of them, marked with the year 1852, he found the name Celestine Rousseau, but not as a child, as a purchase. The notation beside her name read, "Delivered to House Rousseau. Payment settled by Marcel. True mother, M.E. confirmed by letter. Burn after reading." He looked again. The line above listed another girl, Colette Marchand, transferred to convent, denied, deemed unstable, expunged. The ink was faded, but the implication was not. Celestine had found this place. She had read these books, and she had realized she was not Lucien's daughter, not Vivian's. She had been bought, and she had planned her disappearance accordingly. Later that day, Duray visited the convent of St. Marceline, a quiet, unadorned place just past the edge of the French Quarter, guarded not by gates but by silence. He presented his credentials and was led inside by Sister Heiress, an elderly nun with eyes sharp enough to slice through lies. "I'm searching for information about a girl once housed here, Colette Marchand." She paused, then said softly, "We do not speak her name." "Why not?" "She was ill." "In what way?" "She believed she was hunted, that something was buried beneath the garden. She tried to dig it up, then she vanished." "When?" 21 years ago. "Did she leave behind anything?" The nun hesitated, then reached into the folds of her habit and pulled out a rosary, tarnished silver, with a single red bead in the center. "She gave this to another girl before she disappeared, a baby, one with green eyes and a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon." Duray froze. "I believe that baby," the nun said slowly, "was Celestine." He took the rosary and left in silence. That night, the city buzzed with rumors. The Rousseau estate had fallen under investigation. Anonymous letters had reached the newspaper offices. The words "blood ledger" and "red vault" had begun appearing scrawled in alleyways, but no one dared speak publicly. Not yet. Lucien Rousseau hosted a press event, flanked by his lawyers, declaring Celestine's disappearance a tragic accident and warning of slanderous conspiracy. He never mentioned the glove. He never mentioned the ledger. And no one asked why, that same night, he quietly moved all family valuables from the estate and boarded a private ship bound for Europe. Inside the Rousseau mansion, the house staff began noticing things. The music box playing on its own, a scent of lilac in sealed rooms, petals on windowsills where none had been placed, and on the 7th night after the ball, a maid found a message scratched into the mirror of Celestine's old vanity. Not with a knife, not with a quill, with a fingernail. It read, "One daughter vanished, one daughter buried, I am neither." Signed again with the serpent. But this time it was not biting its tail, it was staring forward, mouth open, ready to strike. The message on the mirror changed everything. It was no longer a case of disappearance. It was a declaration. Someone wanted to be found, on her terms. Someone who refused to remain part of a buried ledger. Someone who, in red silk and defiance, had chosen to be remembered not as a daughter, but as a witness. Inspector Duray returned to the Rousseau estate that morning with a warrant. The district judge, pressed by anonymous letters and whispered threats of scandal, had relented. What was once private grief had become a public storm. The house had changed. The staff wore nervous smiles, the halls felt colder, and in every room Duray passed, it felt as though something watched him from just beyond the edge of the candlelight. The inspector moved with purpose, heading straight to Celestine's bedroom. It had not been touched since the night of the ball. The sheets were still smoothed. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the drapes. On the nightstand, her journal sat closed. Embossed initials CR. The lock was broken, not forced, opened, by her own hand. Duray turned the pages carefully. Most entries were mundane: notes about guests, worries about her wedding, sketches of roses and cryptic song lyrics. But then came the final 3 pages, dated the week before her disappearance, and they were different. The first: I am not her daughter. I know this now. I have her hands, not my mother's. The birthmark, Sister Thérèse remembered. But I don't remember her. I remember the vault. I remember the red light, the smell of smoke and lilac. The second: he doesn't know I've seen it, the ledger, my name in ink, and hers, Colette Marchand. They said she was unstable, but I feel her in my veins. She left me something, the rosary. The red bead burns when I hold it. The third: if you find this, I'm already gone, but not taken, not lost. I'm going where they buried the others. I will not be bought. I will not be erased. Follow the music. Under the roots. Under the roots. Duray set the journal down. His hands trembled slightly, and he steadied them against the edge of her desk. He looked around the room again, not as an officer, but as someone trying to see the world through her eyes. A mirror, cracked slightly in the corner. A music box carved with a crescent moon, and on the wall opposite the window, a painting of a garden, lush but strange. In its center stood a tree that did not exist anywhere on the estate. A weeping fig, black bark, crimson leaves, and beneath its roots, something faintly visible. A doorway? Duray left the room and went immediately to the family chapel. Most guests never even knew it existed. It was built into the southern wing, long unused, hidden behind 2 shuttered doors and a veil of dust. The frescoes had faded. The altar was cracked. But at the far end, behind the pulpit, was a trapdoor. The hinges groaned. The air below was colder than the vault, deeper. Earth packed hard from decades of silence. The inspector lit his lantern and descended. He found the second chamber an hour later. There were no ledgers here, no gloves, no books or bindings, just silence and bones. 3 burial alcoves had been carved into the wall. 2 were sealed with stone slabs, names eroded by time. The third was open, empty, waiting. A silk ribbon lay inside, the same kind Celestine had worn in her hair. Duray backed out slowly, his heart racing. Not with fear, but certainty. She had not been taken. She had chosen this disappearance, chosen to walk the path of the buried, to force the truth into the light by vanishing into shadow. As he emerged from the chapel, he was met by Julien, the fiancé, the man who had smiled at the ball while his bride burned like a matchstick in a room full of damp paper. "Inspector," he said coolly, "I assume you found something?" Duray studied him. "I found the woman you were supposed to marry is not who she was told to be." Julien's smile didn't fade. She had episodes. Or she saw clearly for the first time. Julien stepped closer, voice low. "You want to believe she was some kind of hero?" She was delusional, raised in wealth, never earned a day of it. She played at mystery, at rebellion, but in the end, she was just another bored girl trying to punish her father. Duray tilted his head. "Did you love her?" Julien's mouth twitched. "I loved what she represented." Which was? Access. There it was. Duray stepped past him. "You'll want to stay in town, Monsieur Rousseau. Things are changing." And they were. The newspapers had begun printing editorials. Nothing direct, only questions. Where was Celestine Rousseau? Why had her disappearance been hidden? What secrets lay in the vaults of the elite? Whispers turned to letters. Letters turned to protests. On the seventh day, the music played again. Not in the house, but in the garden. The gardener, Baptiste, heard it first. The soft, metallic tinkling of Celestine's music box, though it had never left her room. He followed it into the jasmine, through the roses, toward the edge of the property where the earth curved downward. There, beneath the old fig tree, the one no one remembered planting, was a shallow patch of earth, freshly turned. Baptiste called the inspector. They dug, not far, only a few feet, and they found her, not a corpse, not bones. Her dress, the red silk folded carefully. Inside it, a letter sealed in wax bearing the serpent mark. It read, "They will say I was unstable. They will say I was afraid. But the truth is, I had to become the ghost before they could see the crime. I had to vanish, so the others would rise. There are names in the vault, but there are faces in the earth. They buried daughters beneath empires. I am not the first. I will not be the last. And if you are reading this, I am not finished." At the bottom, a name was signed not in ink, but ash. Colette Marchand, not Celestine, not the daughter, the mother. And just below that, in newer ink, a second line. She remembers now, so do we. Duray read it 3 times before folding it away. And from that moment on, the inspector no longer called it a disappearance. He called it an uprising. The Rousseaus left New Orleans in the dead of night. No farewell to society, no final mass, no carriage through the French Quarter lined with mourners or loyalists. Just a covered wagon, 2 guards, and a trunk so heavy the wheels nearly buckled under it. Lucien Rousseau did not speak to the servants as he passed. He kept his eyes low, fixed on the street, as if afraid the cobblestones might whisper. Vivienne Rousseau, pale and silent, held no rosary, only her husband's arm. They didn't bring the music box. By morning, word had already spread. The Rousseaus had fled, but they had left the house open, unguarded, unclaimed, unblessed, and something had stayed behind. It began with the staff. 2 maids quit without explanation. Baptiste refused to set foot near the garden. At night, the windows on the east wing opened themselves, and in the hallway near Celestine's room, the mirror shattered, without a sound. When found, the shards were arranged on the floor in the shape of a crescent moon. Inspector Duray returned to the house not as a man of law, but as a keeper of questions. He walked the empty halls with a quiet reverence, touching nothing, speaking to no one. The city had begun to murmur about curses, about secrets refusing to die. But Duray believed something else, that Celestine had created a message in the shape of a story, and it was not yet finished. He began collecting pieces. At the city archives, he requested records of all girls declared missing between 1850 and 1880. He filtered them by age, by class, by surname. He looked for those not spoken of, those who had no funerals, no plaques, no memory. He found 12 daughters of wealthy families, gone, with no graves, no cause, no questions. Devereux, Bellamy, Larocque, Rousseau, and others whose names had been scrubbed from the registers but remained faintly etched on forgotten birth certificates. Each of their families had received payment during those years, large sums under vague pretenses, property settlements, maritime insurance, inheritances from uncles who never existed. The ledgers Duray had found in the vault weren't ledgers at all. They were receipts. At the cathedral, he questioned Father Beauchamp, the oldest priest still serving the archdiocese. "Do you remember a girl named Colette Marchand?" The priest looked away. "I remember a scandal, a girl who accused her guardian of theft, and worse." "What happened to her?" "She disappeared, before or after the accusation." He paused. "The day after she confessed, the bishop sealed the record, said it was hysteria." Duray leaned forward. "And if the bishop was paid, then hell awaits the blessed." From that moment, Duray stopped asking politely. He confronted Julienne Larocque in the private salon of the Gentlemen's Club on Royal Street. The young man sipped his cognac and smirked. "She played the part well," he said. "Celestine, or Colette, whichever mask she wore that day. But she was still just a girl. And we are the architects." "Of what?" Julien raised his glass. "Of legacy." Duray stared at him. "You sold her." "No," Julien said calmly. "We sold the silence." The inspector left with his fists clenched so tightly the glass door cracked behind him when he slammed it. That night, the river delivered one more item. A journal. Its cover warped, its pages damp but legible. It was found by a washerwoman near the old docks, wrapped in oilcloth, weighted by a rusted key. Inside, the handwriting was unmistakable. Celestine's, but the voice was not. It was older, sharper, it spoke of blood. "They chose us not for our silence but for our lineage, our purity, our value. And then they bartered us beneath altars and roses. I was 13 when they took me, 15 when they told me to forget, 18 when I became mother to a child I never named. They called her Celestine. They raised her in velvet. They made her a monument to their crimes, but she heard the echoes. I left the serpent for her to find. I wrote my name in dust beneath her cradle. I waited, and when she saw the vault, she remembered the melody. Now we sing it together. Signed, Colette, not Marchand, just Colette." A name reclaimed. The next day, the convent of St. Marceline received an envelope. No sender, no return. Inside were 12 identical rosaries. 11 bore silver beads, 1 bore red. They were placed in the chapel sanctuary where Sister Therese prayed over them daily. She never told the other nuns what they meant, but she wept every time the wind touched the candles. By the end of the week, something began appearing across New Orleans. Chalk drawings, on alley walls, church steps, dock pylons. A symbol, a serpent, not biting its tail but standing upright. Its eyes were open, its tongue was extended, and beneath it 3 words, "We remember her." People asked what it meant. Most received no answer. But one old woman, watching a child draw it on a lamppost, whispered, "It means someone kept a promise." By the time Inspector Duray returned to the Rousseau estate for the last time, the fig tree had bloomed out of season. Red leaves like blood, black bark wet with morning dew. The door beneath its roots was sealed once more, but carved into its surface was a phrase, "Not vanished, chosen." The house was sold to the city a year later, turned into a museum, a place of silence. They kept Celestine's bedroom untouched. The journal remained sealed in glass, and above the fireplace they hung the red dress, preserved, pressed, never worn again. Visitors came from all over. Some left flowers, some left mirrors. But once in 1901, a girl no older than 10 stood before the dress and smiled. She placed her hand on the glass. She wore a rosary around her neck with a single red bead, and when she turned, she said to no one in particular, she wasn't alone. Then she walked out. No record of her name. No one knew who she was. But she was never forgotten, not by the house, not by the river, not by the serpent. In the autumn of 1874, nearly a year after Celestine's red dress was found beside the river, the Rousseau estate reopened, not by the family, but by decree of the city. Rebranded as a public archive and historical society, it was meant to be a gesture of transparency, a symbol of a new era where power would be observed, not obeyed blindly. But the house did not forget what it was. From the first day, the archivists reported strange inconsistencies. Documents misplaced, drawers unlocked, candle wax dripped in the shape of spirals, and always, without fail, the sound of faint music drifting from the east wing after dusk. The music box had been removed months ago, yet the melody persisted. Inspector Duray had long since stepped down from the constabulary. Officially, he cited health. Unofficially, he had become obsessed, not just with Celestine or Colette, but with what they had uncovered, or more precisely, what they had become. He took up residence in a modest room above the print shop on Dauphine Street. From there, he published a quarterly under a pseudonym, the Ash Ledger. It chronicled unexplained disappearances, anonymous testimonies, records once sealed now mysteriously leaked. And slowly, the picture grew darker. He received a letter from a woman in Baton Rouge. Her daughter vanished after attending a private retreat hosted by a Society for the Purity of Southern Lineage. She was promised education, inheritance, a path to marriage. What she left behind was a rosary with a single red bead. Another letter, this one unsigned, arrived from Mobile. It spoke of a vault beneath a courthouse, full of children's hair and baptismal records that didn't match any known births. A hidden wing of the building sealed with serpentine ironwork. Each letter contained symbols, phrases, echoes, and always the name Colette. She was becoming more than a girl. She was becoming a movement. One night, Duray was awoken by a sound outside his window. A melody, not from a music box, from a voice. A girl, soft, high, lilting, was singing in a language he didn't recognize. When he opened the shutters, he saw no one. But on the glass, fogged by his breath, a symbol had been drawn. A serpent, upright, red ink. He wiped it away. But the next morning, it was there again. That day, he received a parcel with no return address. Inside, a glove, child-sized, torn at the seam, and a note that read, "For the others who remember, meet us where the ashes fall." No location, no signature. But he understood. In the garden of the Rousseau estate, now open to the public, the fig tree had begun to blacken. Its leaves withered, its bark cracked. Botanists called it blight. Locals called it justice. And beneath it, children had begun to gather. Not many, 3 or 4. Always different. Always silent. They brought small objects, buttons, thimbles, bones of birds, and buried them at the base of the tree. No one told them to. No one knew who they were. But they always left the same way, by walking backwards until they reached the gate, then turning and vanishing into the street. Visitors started reporting visions. A girl in red, standing at the top of the stairs, looking down with a sad smile. A voice whispering, under the roots, in the dark. A candle that relit itself whenever someone mentioned the word daughter. And still, the red dress hung above the fireplace, untouched, preserved, eternal, until the night had vanished. No signs of entry, no broken glass, no alarms tripped. The curator opened the museum that morning and found, in place of the dress, a mirror, cracked, And on the floor, a single shoe, child-sized, with a name stitched into the insole. Colette. The story hit the papers again. Rumors spread. Was it a theft, a hoax, or had she returned for what belonged to her? The museum offered no comment, but in the following weeks something shifted in the city. 3 judges who had served during the Rousseau investigations suddenly resigned. A bishop was removed from office without public explanation, and in the garden of St. Marceline's 12 identical graves appeared overnight, each unmarked, each accompanied by a rosary buried just beneath the soil. The sisters denied knowledge, but Sister Thérèse was seen the next morning, kneeling before them, whispering the names of girls no one else remembered. Duret, now older, slower, but no less obsessed, visited the graves that evening. He brought with him Celestine's journal, Colette's letters, the names, the ledgers, the map of every vault he had uncovered, drawn in careful ink. He knelt, and for the first time in his life he wept not as an officer, but as a man who had failed to protect what mattered. The wind shifted, and then he heard it. A voice, not Celestine's, not Colette's, but many, layered, echoing. "We are still here." He opened his eyes and saw the serpent drawn in the dirt at his knees, but this time the tongue was not forked. It was a ribbon, red silk, flowing into the earth. Duret returned home and wrote one final entry in the ash ledger. They thought they were buying silence, but they were feeding a memory, and memory does not rot. It grows, beneath soil, between pages, in the breath of daughters who were never meant to survive, but did. She disappeared, yes, but only from their world. In ours, she reigns. He signed it. For her, for all of them, D. And when he passed in his sleep 3 months later, they found his room perfectly undisturbed. Except for one detail. His rosary had been replaced, not with beads, but with 12 buttons, one red. By the spring of 1885, the Sisterhood of the Red Ribbon had spread far beyond the streets of New Orleans. Small gatherings appeared in Baton Rouge, Natchez, and even as far as Charleston. The newspapers dismissed them as hysteria cults or children playing witches, but those who attended, quietly, cautiously, knew better. They weren't summoning anything, they were listening, and what they heard, increasingly, was her. In every city, the rituals were the same. They met in silence, braided ribbons by candlelight, recited the names aloud like liturgy, and ended each meeting by laying a red garment, a glove, a scarf, a scrap of lace, into water, a river, a basin, a fountain, any body of water that could carry memory. But something shifted that spring. The waters began to return what had been taken. In Biloxi, a fisherman pulled up a music box in his net, perfectly preserved, still playing a lullaby in French. He gave it to his daughter, who claimed the melody made her dream of a burning garden and a woman with no face. In Atlanta, a flood unearthed a trunk buried beneath a former orphanage. Inside were dresses, dozens, all red, all stitched with initials that did not match any living registry. One bore the name Celestine. The trunk was confiscated by police and disappeared within days. In Savannah, a 7-year-old girl named Thea ran from her home one night, barefoot and in tears. When her parents found her hours later in a cemetery, she was sitting on a gravestone, whispering in a voice not her own. She said her name is Colette, the girl explained, eyes unfocused. She said they buried her story, but not her soul. The gravestone was unmarked, its records destroyed in a fire in 1869. Thea never spoke again. And in New Orleans, at the edge of the Mississippi, something else surfaced. A casket, child-sized, lacquered black, adorned with silver roses. It drifted to the shore on the morning of April 3rd, precisely 12 years after Celestine Rousseau vanished. The city tried to suppress the story. Officials claimed it was theatrical, an elaborate hoax. The casket was removed under the cover of darkness, but not before a sister named Marguerite reached it. She never opened it. She didn't need to, because carved into the underside, in handwriting elegant and firm, were the words, "Do not bury what still breathes." That night, Marguerite dreamt of the old Rousseau estate, but not as it stood now. In her dream, it was vibrant, alive, candlelit and echoing with music. Girls in crimson gowns danced in circles across the marble floors. Their eyes shimmered. Their feet never touched the ground. At the center stood a figure, her face turned away, her arms outstretched. Celestine, but older, wiser. And behind her, a door, one Marguerite had never seen in waking life. Painted black, trimmed in silver, with a serpent carved across it, head bowed, tail split. Celestine turned just as Marguerite reached the door. Her eyes glowed red, not with malice, but with memory. "You cannot unmake what they forged," she whispered, "but you can name it." When Marguerite awoke, her palms were stained red, though there was no ink, no dye, no wound. She wrote nothing down. She simply walked to the museum and laid a ribbon on the fig tree. Then she disappeared from public view. In the months that followed, sisterhood gatherings became more frequent and more guarded. They stopped inviting newcomers, stopped leaving evidence. They memorized their names, then burned the paper. They whispered their prayers, then bit their tongues until blood sealed them. They were no longer preserving a memory. They were protecting a prophecy. One rooted in the oldest part of the Rousseau estate, the sealed East Wing. Long rumored to be the original quarters of the Rousseau matriarch, the East Wing had been closed to the public since the museum's founding. A safety concern, they claimed. Unstable foundation. But a letter leaked by a former custodian suggested otherwise. It contained a floor plan and a ledger. The floor plan revealed a hidden staircase behind the fireplace in the music room, leading down, not up. A spiral descent labeled only La Voûte, the vault. The ledger listed dates, names, and descriptions. Girls, ages, wards, daughters, many with no surnames, all noted with terms like promised, prepared, or, most hauntingly, offered. The ledger ended in 1873, the year of Celestine's disappearance. The custodian's final note read, "I was told never to open the vault, but I heard them sing, and children who are buried should not sing." No one has seen the custodian since, but the floor plan reached the hands of the sisterhood, and on the 12th anniversary of the Masquerade they acted. Dressed in mourning black, 11 women entered the museum as visitors. Each carried a small satchel. Each moved with practiced coordination. At precisely 3:03 p.m., they activated the museum's fire alarm. In the chaos that followed, they slipped behind the velvet ropes into the music room and lit the fireplace. The flame revealed what dust had hidden. The outline of a door, a hiss of air, a descending draft, and the scent of lavender and ash. They broke the stone loose with tools hidden beneath their skirts. Behind it, a passage spiraled down into the dark. They descended, and what they found beneath the Rousseau estate has never been formally recorded. But stories leaked, through whispers, through dreams, through visions passed from mother to daughter like old recipes and family curses. There were rooms, sealed with iron, lined with beds, books filled with names, songs, chants, lessons in languages older than French, paintings of women in red, faceless and weeping, a well that echoed when you breathed into it, a crib filled with teeth, and a mirror that reflected not your face, but your memory. The sisterhood emerged hours later. They said nothing. They sealed the entrance again, but they did not destroy what they found. Because you do not destroy altars. You guard them. And as they left the museum, the clock struck midnight, just like it had 12 years before. And for the first time in a decade, the bells of the old chapel rang. Unbidden, unelectrified, 11 times. Then silence. But the next morning, beneath the fig tree, a 12th ribbon had been tied. Red, long, weighted at the end with a silver serpent charm. No one knew who left it, but everyone understood what it meant. She had returned, not in spirit, in purpose, and the vault was no longer closed. The museum shut down the following month. Officially, it was for structural assessment and modernization. A letter posted to the gates promised renovations, increased security, and digital cataloging of the Rousseau family collection. But inside the city, no one believed the sign, because everyone who lived near Royal Street knew what really happened that night. They heard the bells, they saw the candles flicker, and some, those with memories older than sense, swore they saw a figure in red standing at the highest window, gazing down on them, as if deciding who still remembered and who had forgotten. The sisterhood vanished from public view. No more meetings in parlors, no more ribbons at the river. They had gone inward, into something deeper than ritual. A final phase had begun, one not meant for the streets or the papers, but not everyone was content with silence. On the first storm of the summer, a man named Julian Harrow arrived in New Orleans. He claimed to be a historian from Massachusetts, interested in family lineages and southern estates. But Harrow asked too many questions. He visited the Rousseau estate 3 times in 1 week, tried to bribe his way into the sealed East Wing, and was seen scribbling sketches of the fig tree in a cafe. He was last seen entering the Lafayette Cemetery. 2 days later, his notebook was found inside a crypt, its pages soaked from the inside out, though the tomb had been sealed for over 20 years. Written on the first page, in handwriting that was not his, were 3 words. She chose silence. The rest of the pages had been rewritten, diagrams and family trees replaced with drawings, intricate, eerie depictions of women with mouths stitched shut, kneeling before a black door. In each drawing, a red thread extended from the woman's chest to the eye of a serpent. The notebook was confiscated by the city, but copies began to appear, folded into hymnals, sewn into the lining of wedding gowns, hidden behind portraits in long-forgotten attics. And then the dreams started. People all across the French Quarter, men, women, children, reported visions of deep, winding staircases and voices calling them by names they didn't remember, names they couldn't pronounce. One woman, an elderly laundress, claimed she woke up one night with her hands blistered and bleeding. She had no memory of what happened, but her sink was filled with red fabric. When she lifted it, she found it was a dress, a perfect fit, with the initials CR embroidered in silver. By the end of that year, the vault beneath the Rousseau estate was no longer legend. It was known, unspoken but felt, a pressure in the air, a tension in the brick, a truth too heavy for the living to carry, yet too sacred to bury again. Whispers grew louder. She's not trapped down there. She's waiting. She never meant to leave. And then, one night, a letter arrived at the office of the Ash Ledger, now printed sporadically by anonymous hands. The letter was unsigned, no return address, but the ink shimmered faintly as if still wet. Inside was a short statement. The masquerade was never a celebration. It was a contract, 12 families, 12 daughters, one door, one vow. Attached to the note was a photograph, sepia-toned, slightly warped by age. It showed the ballroom of the Rousseau estate, pristine and radiant. 12 young women in red stood in a circle, eyes closed, hands bound with silver cords. Above them, painted onto the ceiling, was the serpent symbol, now unmistakable, unmistakably intentional. Below the photo was a date, February 17th, 1873. 3 days before Celestine vanished. Suddenly, everything fit. The red dress, the river, the music box, the sealed vault. Celestine had never been taken. She had been offered. Not by strangers, but by her own blood. And somewhere in that basement, somewhere behind that black door, was the truth of what she became. The sisterhood never confirmed it. They never published anything, never gave interviews, never left another ribbon in public. But one of them, a girl named Elise, barely 20, sent a final postcard to her cousin in Baton Rouge. On the front was a sketch of the Rousseau house, but the windows were missing. The trees were ash. The sky was filled with serpents shaped like smoke. On the back, a single sentence: "We unstitched the vow." In 1890, the museum reopened, completely redesigned, all traces of the Rousseau family removed. New wings, new plaques, new lighting, but despite the public tours and cheerful docents, one wing remained permanently sealed. Visitors often asked about it. Fire damage, the guides would say, nothing to see. And yet, sometimes, when the hall is quiet enough and the air still, you might hear it. A faint sound, not quite music, not quite a voice. A lullaby in a language no one teaches anymore. And always, always, accompanied by the scent of lavender and something burning. One child, on a field trip, pointed to the sealed wing and said, "She's looking at me." When asked who, the child only whispered, "The river girl." The Rousseau story was never told in school books. No one wrote plays about it. The city moved on, but beneath the sidewalks, beneath the roots, beneath the bones of buildings long since rebuilt, she remains, not as a ghost, not as vengeance, but as a memory too strong to die and too sacred to be erased. And every year, on the anniversary of the masquerade, someone still ties a ribbon to a tree, not out of fear, out of love. Because Celestine Rousseau wasn't the end. She was the warning. She was the question every mother now asks when her daughter turns 16. Will she be chosen? And more importantly, will she choose herself?